Elena, are you sure? I bet by my crawl I'm calling you.
This tank is just more expensive parts. It will work.
Engineers failed to fix a modern tank engine until the general called a genius Army veteran Master Sergeant Elena Rodriguez thought her days of fixing impossible mechanical problems were over when she retired from the Army's elite vehicle recovery unit. But when the military's newest $8 million Abrams tank suffered a catastrophic engine failure that stumped every engineer at Aberdeen Proving Ground, General Morrison made a desperate call to the grease monkey, who had once kept his convoy alive in Iraq and discovered that genius doesn't always wear officers' bars. The morning sun cast long shadows across Aberdeen Proving Ground as Dr. James Mitchell stared at the silent M1A3 Abrams tank, his MIT PhD feeling worthless against 70 tons of stubborn steel. 3 days. 3 days of diagnostics, component replacements, and theoretical analyses, and the $8 million machine still wouldn't even hiccup. "This is impossible," Mitchell muttered, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool Maryland morning. "Every system checks perfect. It should be purring like a kitten." Colonel Sarah Hayes approached her face grim. In 2 weeks, this tank would demonstrate America's next-generation armor capabilities to Congress. Failure meant billions in lost funding and years of wasted development. "What about the manufacturer's team, stumped?" Mitchell's voice cracked. "They have never seen anything like this. It's like the tank has just given up." Meanwhile, 200 miles south in Fayetteville, Elena Rodriguez was teaching her 12-year-old grandson Miguel how to gap spark plugs in her small garage. At 45, her weathered hands moved with the precision of someone who'd spent 22 years coaxing life from dying machines. "Abuela, why do you always fix things the hard way?" Miguel asked, watching her adjust the gap by feel rather than using the gauge. Elena smiled. "Because machines lie, mijo. Gauges lie. Computers lie. But your hands—" She pressed his small fingers against the engine block. "Your hands tell the truth." The phone rang, interrupting the lesson. Elena wiped her hands and answered without checking the caller ID. "Rodriguez Auto Repair?" "Master Sergeant Rodriguez, this is General Morrison." Elena nearly dropped the phone. Morrison, the general whose convoy she'd kept running through the hell of Fallujah, whose life she'd saved when his command vehicle took an RPG hit. "Sir, I'm not Master Sergeant anymore." "Elena." His voice carried the weight of desperation. "I don't care what rank you're wearing. I need the woman who kept my Humvee running with duct tape and prayer when every manual said it was dead." Elena looked at Miguel, whose eyes had gone wide at hearing "General." The boy's future hung in the balance, his dream of becoming a military engineer following in her footsteps, but with the education she'd never had. "What kind of problem, sir?" "The kind that could end careers, including yours if you can't work one more miracle." The line went quiet, except for the sound of Elena's heartbeat and Miguel's excited breathing. "How fast can you get to Aberdeen?" 4 hours later, Elena stood in Aberdeen's massive hangar, feeling like David facing Goliath. The disabled tank loomed before her, surrounded by engineers whose pressed lab coats and pristine clipboards screamed, "Never touched a wrench." "This is Master Sergeant Rodriguez," General Morrison announced. "She's going to solve our problem." Dr. Mitchell approached his skepticism barely concealed. "General, we've had teams of engineers." "Doctor," Elena's voice cut through his protest like a blade, "show me what you found." For 30 minutes, Mitchell's team explained their procedures with the enthusiasm of pallbearers. Elena listened, but her eyes were working, noting scuff marks on access panels, the way certain bolts showed fresh tool marks, the subtle signs that told a machine's story. So the engine's mechanically perfect but won't start, Elena summarized. What about the integration protocols? Integration protocols. Mitchell's confusion was genuine. The conversation between systems. These new tanks are like teenagers. Everything has to talk to everything else, and if one system gives another the silent treatment. Elena walked around the tank, her calloused fingers tracing wiring harnesses that the engineers had deemed obviously functional. She paused at a connector that looked identical to dozens of others. Here, she pointed to what appeared to be a standard data line. This is your problem. Mitchell scoffed. That's just secondary data. Not critical to, in this system, it is. Elena's voice carried the authority of someone who'd learned hard lessons. This tank uses distributed processing. If the computers can't gossip, they sulk. And sulking computers don't start engines. She traced the wire to a junction box, her experienced eye catching what sophisticated diagnostics had missed. Someone reconnected this to the wrong terminal during maintenance. The computers are getting conflicting data. Impossible, Mitchell protested. Our technicians are highly trained. Your technicians are used to color-coded systems and perfect lighting. Elena made the correction with movements that spoke of muscle memory. I learned to fix things in sandstorms under fire with whatever tools I could find. The tank systems came alive. Lights flickered, computers hummed, and then the massive engine roared to life with a sound that brought tears to Colonel Hayes's eyes. But Elena wasn't smiling. Something was wrong. "Shut it down," she said sharply. "Now!" "What? Why?" Mitchell looked panicked. "It's working perfectly. Shut it down." Elena's command voice made everyone jump. The engine died, and Elena was already moving her hands, flying over connections with desperate speed. The fix was temporary. The real problem is deeper, and if we keep running it... She pulled out a wire that was already showing heat damage. The system will cascade fail in about 10 minutes. We'd lose not just the engine, but every computer in the tank. The hangar fell silent, except for Elena's rapid breathing and the sound of her grandson's voice echoing in her memory. "Why do you always fix things the hard way?" Because sometimes Elena thought the hard way is the only way that works. "General," she said, looking up at Morrison with eyes that held both determination and fear, "I can fix this, but I'm going to need something that's not in any manual." "What do you need?" Morrison asked, though Elena's expression suggested he might not like the answer. "Time and trust." Elena wiped her hands on a rag that had seen better decades. The real problem isn't the connection, it's the entire integration architecture. Someone designed this system assuming perfect conditions and perfect maintenance. Dr. Mitchell stepped forward, his professional pride stinging. The integration architecture was designed by teams of experts using the most advanced modeling software. "Doctor, have you ever tried to fix a tank while mortars are falling?" Elena's question stopped him cold. Because that's what these systems need to survive, not perfect conditions chaos. She turned to Morrison. "Sir, I need to completely rewire the integration pathways. It'll take 12 hours, and if I'm wrong..." She gestured at the multi-million-dollar machine. "Well, let's just say my auto shop won't cover the warranty." Morrison's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his face went pale. "Elena, we don't have 12 hours. The Secretary of Defense is flying in tomorrow morning for a personal demonstration. If this tank isn't running, then careers end," Elena finished, "including yours." The weight of that reality settled over the hangar like a shroud. Elena thought of Miguel waiting at home for news of whether his grandmother was still the miracle worker he believed her to be. "There's another option," she said slowly. "A field modification I developed in Iraq. It's not pretty, it's not by the book, and it'll void every warranty this tank has." "But it'll work?" Colonel Hayes asked. "It worked when my convoy was pinned down outside Fallujah, and we had 3 disabled vehicles that needed to move or we'd all die." Elena's voice carried the weight of that memory. "But if I do this, and it fails during tomorrow's demonstration—" She didn't need to finish. They all understood the stakes. Morrison made the decision that would define both their careers. "Do it!" Elena spent the next 8 hours performing surgery on the tank's nervous system. She bypassed redundant safety protocols, hardwired critical connections, and created pathways that existed nowhere in the technical manuals. "This is insane," Mitchell muttered as he watched Elena splice directly into the main computer's data bus. "You're violating every safety protocol." "Safety protocols are written by people who've never been shot at," Elena replied without looking up. "Sometimes survival trumps safety." As she worked, Elena told stories about keeping vehicles running with coat hangers and prayer about the time she'd hot-wired an M1 tank using jumper cables from a Humvee, about the day she'd saved Morrison's convoy by doing exactly what the manual said was impossible. "The thing about machines," she explained while rerouting power distribution, "is that they want to work. Engineers complicate them, but at their heart, they're simple. They just need someone who speaks their language." By 3 a.m., Elena had transformed the tank's integration system into something that looked like organized chaos, but functioned with brutal efficiency. Every connection was hardwired, every pathway was direct, and every safety protocol had been replaced with practical redundancy. "Fire it up," she said, stepping back with exhaustion written across her face. The tank came alive with a roar that shook the hangar, but this time Elena was smiling. "How do you know it'll hold?" Morrison asked. "Because I built it the way I built everything in Iraq to work when it matters most." But Elena's triumph was short-lived. As dawn broke over Aberdeen, a convoy of black SUVs arrived carrying officials whose expressions suggested that Elena's unauthorized modifications had attracted the wrong kind of attention. "Ms. Rodriguez," said a stern woman in an expensive suit, "I'm Deputy Secretary Williams. We need to discuss your creative approach to military vehicle maintenance." Elena felt her stomach drop. She'd saved the tank, but at what cost? "Ma'am, the modifications were necessary." "The modifications," Williams interrupted, "violated 17 different safety protocols and voided the warranty on an $8 million vehicle. Some people are calling for criminal charges." Morrison stepped forward. "Deputy Secretary Ms. Rodriguez solved a problem that stumped our best engineers. By ignoring established procedures and creating potential safety hazards." Williams' voice was ice-cold. "The question now is whether her solution is genius or recklessness." Elena looked at the tank that was humming with perfect efficiency, then at the officials who would decide her fate. In a few hours, she would either be vindicated or destroyed. "Ma'am," she said quietly. "There's only one way to find out." The Secretary of Defense arrived at 0800 sharp, his entourage including senators, defense contractors, and enough brass to outfit a marching band. Elena stood beside her modified tank, feeling like she was about to be executed by firing squad. "General Morrison," Secretary Patterson said, his voice carrying the authority of absolute power, "I understand we've had some complications with the demonstration vehicle. Sir, we encountered technical difficulties that required innovative solutions." Innovative solutions. Patterson's tone suggested he'd heard that euphemism before. "I'm told our demonstration vehicle has been modified by someone without engineering credentials using procedures that aren't approved by any manual." Elena felt every eye in the hangar turn toward her. This was the moment when 22 years of experience would either be validated or dismissed as the reckless tinkering of an unqualified mechanic. "Mr. Secretary," Elena said, stepping forward before Morrison could stop her, "the tank is ready for demonstration." Patterson studied her with the calculating gaze of someone who'd spent decades evaluating people under pressure. "And you are Master Sergeant Elena Rodriguez, retired, the person who made your tank work. By violating safety protocols and ignoring established procedures," Deputy Secretary Williams interjected. "Mr. Secretary, I strongly recommend we postpone this demonstration until proper engineering review." "No," Patterson's voice cut through Williams' protest. "We're here to see if American military technology works when it needs to. Let's see what Sergeant Rodriguez has built." The next 30 minutes were the longest of Elena's life. The tank performed flawlessly, starting instantly, running smoothly, responding to every command with precision that impressed even the skeptical engineers. But Elena knew the real test was coming. "Sergeant Rodriguez," Patterson said, as the demonstration concluded, "I'm told your modifications haven't been tested under stress conditions." Elena's heart sank. She'd feared this moment, the demand for testing that would take weeks and might reveal flaws in her hasty field modifications. "Sir, the modifications are based on field-tested principles." "I'm not interested in principles," Patterson interrupted. "I want to see how this tank performs under combat conditions." He gestured to a team of soldiers who'd been waiting in the background. "Loaded up. Full combat simulation, maximum stress testing. If Sergeant Rodriguez's modifications can handle what we're about to put them through, then we'll know we have something special." Elena watched in horror as the tank was loaded with full ammunition, additional armor plating, and electronic warfare equipment that would stress every system she'd modified. The combat simulation would push the vehicle beyond anything she'd anticipated. "Sir," she said desperately, "the modifications weren't designed for—" "Sergeant," Patterson's voice was gentle but firm, "either your solution works under real conditions or it doesn't work at all." The combat simulation was brutal. The tank raced across rough terrain, fired its main gun repeatedly, and endured electronic jamming that would have crippled unmodified systems. Elena watched the stress monitors with growing dread, seeing temperatures and voltages approaching critical levels. "It's not going to hold," Mitchell said with barely concealed satisfaction. "The modifications are failing." Elena could see it too. Her hastily wired connections beginning to overheat, her bypassed safety systems struggling under loads they weren't designed to handle. In minutes, the tank would suffer catastrophic failure in front of the most important audience possible, Sergeant Rodriguez. Patterson said quietly. "Is there anything you can do?" Elena looked at the failing systems, then at Miguel's face in her memory. Her grandson believed she could fix anything, but this time she might have finally met her match. "Sir," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "I need to get inside that tank." "Absolutely not," Williams protested. "If the systems fail while you're inside, then I'll fix them from the inside," Elena said, already moving toward the tank. "It's what I do." As Elena climbed into the tank's engine compartment while it was still running the simulation, she realized that this moment would define not just her career, but her legacy. Either she would prove that experience and intuition could triumph over formal procedures, or she would become a cautionary tale about the dangers of unauthorized innovation. The tank lurched forward into another phase of the simulation, and Elena disappeared into the mechanical chaos of her own creation, racing against time to save both the machine and her reputation. Inside the tank's engine compartment, Elena felt like she was back in Iraq, surrounded by the roar of machinery, the smell of hot metal, and the pressure of knowing that lives depended on her ability to make broken things work. "Rodriguez, what's your status?" Morrison's voice crackled through her headset as the tank bounced over simulated rough terrain. "Working on it, sir," Elena replied, her hands flying over connections that were sparking and overheating under the extreme stress. "I need 3 minutes." "You have 90 seconds before system failure," came Mitchell's voice, tinged with what sounded like anticipation. Elena could see the problem now. Her field modifications were solid, but the additional combat load was creating power fluctuations that her hastily wired systems couldn't handle. She needed to reroute power distribution on the fly, while the tank was moving, while systems were failing around her. "Abuela, why do you always fix things the hard way?" Miguel's voice echoed in her memory as Elena realized what she had to do. She pulled out her personal toolkit, the same tools she'd carried through 2 deployments, tools that had saved her convoy more times than she could count. "This is insane," she muttered, then began rewiring the power distribution system while the tank continued its combat simulation. Outside, Secretary Patterson watched the stress monitors with growing concern. "General Morrison, what exactly is Sergeant Rodriguez doing in there?" "What she's always done, Sir," Morrison replied, "the impossible." Elena's modifications were holding but barely. Each connection she made bought precious seconds. Each bypass she created kept critical systems online just a little longer. But she was running out of time and options. 30 seconds to cascade failure, Mitchell announced, his voice carrying across the hangar. That's when Elena remembered something from Fallujah, a trick she'd learned when her convoy's lead vehicle had taken an RPG hit and she'd had to keep it running long enough to reach safety. It was dangerous. It violated every safety protocol ever written, and it just might work. "Morrison," she called through her headset, "I need you to trust me one more time." "Elena, whatever you're thinking, I'm going to overload the main power bus and force the system to reset. It'll either fix everything or fry every computer in this tank." The silence that followed was deafening. Elena could imagine the faces above Patterson weighing the cost of an $8 million tank against the potential breakthrough. Morrison, remembering all the times she'd pulled off the impossible Williams, calculating the political fallout if this went wrong. "Do it!" Patterson's voice came through the headset, surprising everyone. Elena took a deep breath and connected two wires that should never touch. The tank's electrical system screamed in protest, lights flickered, and for a terrifying moment, everything went dark. Then, like a phoenix rising from electronic ashes, the systems came back online, not just functional, but running better than they had before. Elena's desperate gambit had forced the tank's computers to recognize her modifications as the new normal, integrating them seamlessly into the vehicle's operation. Holy shit! Mitchell's voice carried clearly through the hangar. It worked. Elena climbed out of the engine compartment, her face streaked with grease and sweat, her hands shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. The tank was purring like a contented cat, all systems green, performing at levels that exceeded original specifications. Secretary Patterson approached her with an expression she couldn't read. "Sergeant Rodriguez, what you just did was that standard procedure." Elena met his gaze directly. "No, sir. Standard procedure would have been to shut down the tank and wait for depot-level repair. But sometimes standard procedure gets people killed. And sometimes," Patterson said slowly, "it prevents innovation that could save lives." He turned to address the assembled crowd of officials, engineers, and military personnel. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we've witnessed today is exactly what American military technology should be: adaptable, resilient, and effective under the worst possible conditions." Elena felt tears threatening as Patterson continued. "Sergeant Rodriguez has demonstrated that the most advanced technology in the world is only as good as the people who maintain it. And sometimes those people need to think beyond the manual." Deputy Secretary Williams stepped forward, her expression grudging but respectful. "Sergeant Rodriguez, I owe you an apology. Your methods may be unorthodox, but your results speak for themselves." But Elena wasn't finished. The success of the tank demonstration had given her a platform she'd never expected, and she intended to use it. "Mr. Secretary," she said, "this tank works because I combined engineering theory with field experience, but there are thousands of soldiers out there maintaining equipment with outdated procedures and inadequate training. If we really want military technology to work when it matters most, we need to bridge the gap between the laboratory and the battlefield." Patterson nodded thoughtfully. "What are you proposing?" Elena looked around at the faces surrounding her engineers who'd learned to respect practical experience officers who'd seen innovation triumph over procedure, and officials who were beginning to understand that the best solutions often came from unexpected sources. "I'm proposing that we stop treating field experience and engineering theory as opposing forces," she said. "I'm proposing that we build teams that combine both, that we train engineers to understand real-world conditions and teach mechanics to understand the science behind their work." The silence that followed was pregnant with possibility. Elena had just proposed revolutionizing how the military approached technology development, and she could see in Patterson's eyes that he was seriously considering it. "Sergeant Rodriguez," Patterson said finally, "how would you like to lead that effort?" 2 years later, Elena stood in the Pentagon briefing room where it all began. But this time, she wore a different kind of uniform. The crisp suit of the Director of Practical Systems Integration, a position created specifically for her revolutionary approach to military technology. "Members of Congress," she said, addressing the Joint Committee on Defense Appropriations, "the Practical Systems Integration Program has exceeded every performance metric we established. The numbers were staggering. Equipment reliability had increased by 300%. Maintenance costs had dropped by 40%. Most importantly, soldier satisfaction with their equipment had reached all-time highs. Representative Johnson, Elena continued, you asked about cost savings. By identifying and fixing problems during development rather than after deployment, we've saved taxpayers over $2 billion in the past 18 months. In the audience, Miguel, now 14 and already accepted into a prestigious engineering program, watched his grandmother with obvious pride. The boy who'd once asked why she fixed things the hard way now understood that sometimes the hard way was the only way that worked. Elena's program had become a model for industries far beyond the military. Major corporations were sending their engineers to her training centers, where MIT graduates learned to diagnose problems by sound and feel, while experienced mechanics learned the theoretical principles behind their intuitive knowledge. Dr. Mitchell, Elena said, gesturing to her former skeptic, who now served as her deputy director, would you like to share the results from our latest field tests? Mitchell stood, his respect for Elena evident in every word. Madam Director, our hybrid teams combining credentialed engineers with experienced field personnel are solving problems 60% faster than traditional engineering teams alone. After the hearing, Elena walked through Arlington National Cemetery, visiting the graves of soldiers who died because their equipment failed when they needed it most. She carried with her a simple promise that her work would ensure future soldiers had equipment that worked when it mattered most. Her phone buzzed with a text from Morrison, now chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Elena, the president, wants to meet the woman who revolutionized military technology. Dinner at the White House next week. Elena smiled, thinking of the small garage where it all began, where a grandmother had taught her grandson that machines wanted to work. They just needed someone who spoke their language. The genius had always been there. It just took the right crisis to reveal it and the right person to nurture it into something that could change the world. The end.